Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this session. Welcome to our Ask the Expert series. If you're new to our webinar series, welcome and thanks for being here. Criterion Edge runs multiple informative webinars throughout the year. Today's live Q&A topic, we'll be discussing the role of regulatory affairs in the clinical and performance evaluation report process. We're proud to announce that Criterion Edge has been awarded Company of the Year among top regulatory services companies. So how can we help you? If you'd like to speak with us about your upcoming projects or regulatory writing needs, we would be happy to book an appointment with you. You can email us for a free 30-minute consultation at consult@criterionedge.com. You can also book a meeting time directly with the link that we will now send in the chat. Our presenter today is Lori Mitchell, founder and president of Criterion Edge, a global medical and regulatory writing firm serving the medical device, pharmaceutical, and biotech industries. Lori has over 20 years of experience in medical writing, safety, and pharmacovigilance management and regulatory reporting. Having provided regulatory and medical writing solutions to many pharma and medical device companies, both large and small, she is a proven leader in designing practical strategies to meet current global regulatory challenges. Lori is also a published author and holds a Master of Nursing from UCLA. And joining us today is Dr. Sarah Chavez, Director of IVD and Scientific Writing Services with Criterion Edge. Sarah has a BS in biochemistry and a PhD in molecular and cellular biology with 25 years of laboratory bench experience and has taught at the university level for 20 years. She has extensive scientific writing experience in an academic environment, as well as for several large textbook publishers. Sarah's strong background in basic research and her extensive experience with regulatory writing will allow her to assist companies with IVDR readiness as part of the Criterion Edge team. And now I will welcome Lori to give an overview of how our session will operate today. Hi, Lori, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks a lot for that lead up, Olivia. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. We've got our very special guest, Dr. Sarah Chavez, who's going to help me. Both of us are going to work together to answer your questions. This is an Ask the Experts, one of our webinars where there's not really any presentation. So today we're going to be answering questions regarding really focusing on how regulatory affairs professionals specifically can lead the critical decision-making throughout the planning and preparation, even into the writing and completion of the clinical evaluation report. And I would even amend that by saying throughout the clinical evaluation process, which culminates actually in a report. So really the role of regulatory affairs within your organization is very critical to managing and supporting this entire process. And what are the critical components of that process that influence project success? Sarah and I have some opinions on that. And we're saying, one thing I'd like to say really quickly is that we're using CER here, CER, but the title of this is for CERs and PERs, performance evaluation reports in the IVD space. So for any of our colleagues out there that are from the IVD industry, our comments today apply to the PER. The process is the process, and the support is relatively the same. So I wanted to use that as a caveat, but for shortening, we will use CER, but it also means a CER or a PER. And then finally, how to overcome any roadblocks, which there always are, and driving to that all-important on-time submission. So without further ado, let's get to our questions.
All right, let's get to our first question. And Lori and Sarah, let me know when you can see it on your screen.
Oh, yes. This question is right up there for Sarah.
Yes, so hi, I'm Sarah Chavez. I'm helping a lot of our IVDR clients sort of approach the PER. And for many of them, it's a brand new topic, it's a brand new report. I would say the main thing that we suggest very early on is to have all of these independent reports ready to go. Think of each of the documents, each of these supporting documents, such as the SVR, the Scientific Validity Report, the Clinical Performance Report, the CPR, and the Analytical Performance Report, the APR. Those should each be 3 standalone documents. But as you're pulling them together into the PER, you are not just simply stapling them or copying and pasting them over into different sections. The PER should help to tie those reports together and to help to provide a context by which each of those standalone reports can be considered sort of telling the story of your device. So think of it more as your opportunity to pull these information pieces together to tell that cohesive story.
All right, thanks, Sarah. Our next question comes from Tabitha, and she is asking, what are the key components of the early planning stage that will set you up for success?
Well, I can start with that. One of the first things that we want everyone to do is give yourself time, give your team time. Start early in this early planning stage. Early means really early, the year before, if you can, 8 months at the minimum. And gather the cross-functional team together, because there's going to be so many inputs that are coming in. For the regulatory affairs professionals out there, I don't need to tell you that inputs are coming in from the clinical team, from the design team. There are many documents that need to be gathered and ensure that they are final. In other words, for example, the IFU, probably the most critical document. Are you satisfied with it? Are you satisfied with its wording? Is your IFU MDR aligned? Are you solid on the intended purpose, the use, anatomic locations, all of that information? Are there any updates? I would say one of the most important document really to get us off to an early start is the IFU. So if there are any revs that need to be addressed for the IFU, get those addressed and locked in early. That would be one. So that's one of the key components, is that make those early decisions early. Design changes, IFU changes kill a CER project or a PER project, or it kills the timelines of them. So make sure you're solid there. Line up your team members. Make sure that they're all aligned with what their roles and responsibilities are. So in other words, identify roles and responsibilities and identify those team members. Those are some of the key components in the early planning stage, is to anticipate, make early decisions, do a gap assessment of what you're missing. And I don't mean of just data. What kind of skills are you missing? What bandwidth are you missing? What tools are you missing? For example, with regards to tools, what do I mean by that? To be MDR compliant or IVDR compliant, your systematic literature reviews must be very robust and very methodologically sound and meet best practices. Do you have the ability to have access to that type of platform? Because these are not internet searches, and things must be very, very, very carefully documented with your systematic literature reviews. And there are 3 of them for every CER or every PER. There's the subject device search, the clinical device search, and the state-of-the-art search. So those searches will need to be very robust. That's what I meant by tools. So look for those kinds of gaps and try to identify them and fill them early.
All right, thanks for that answer, Lori. Here's our next question coming from Lakshmi, and she's asking, my team will be working on CEP, CER, post-market docs, and SSCPs. So what is the ideal strategy to plan?
Sarah, you want to take that, or we can take that together?
Yes. So in my experience, there are a lot of moving pieces, and sometimes there may be one document that kind of holds up the entire process. So one piece that you're waiting on. There are some of the pieces, though, that I feel like if you wait too long in the process of writing, they can really delay the entire or require rewrites for some of these other moving pieces. So, and I may be biased because I spend a lot of time working on the state of the art section, but having a true understanding of what is considered state of the art and what the state of published data is for your device and for your competitors is extremely useful to have early on in the process. So we often try to pull that section together very early so that it almost gives you a preview of the types of data that are readily available regarding your technology or your test. So that would be my main suggestion from my perspective, would be to ensure that you have an accurate understanding of the pieces that you have available to you, the pieces of data, what types of data you're collecting, so that as you're developing your plan for the future, you know what types of data are already currently readily available to you. It will help you with simple things like making sure that you're identifying the most appropriate safety and performance objectives, that you're using the correct search terms, that your intended purpose is aligned, and that you can actually find data on all of the intended purposes for your particular device. So I would say having that sort of state-of-the-art search conducted very early in the process to give you all a better sense of what's out there will definitely help you.
I want to underscore, Sarah, that was excellent. And I want to underscore a point that you very clearly made, but I want to underscore its importance. Sarah, you just heard Sarah kind of hone in on the state of the art section. And in the PER world, that's the SVR, Scientific Validity Report. We consider that to be, we've written many CERs, MDR, and then even before that, MDD. And there is no more important section in the CER for it to be accurate and solid than the state of the art section. It provides the foundation for the rest of the writing in the CER, all of which is important. But the SOA section, the state of the art section, is so foundational that it must be very robustly executed and analyzed. And part of that analysis is the identification of the safety and performance objectives of the device, and then further the identification of the acceptance criteria for those safety and performance objectives. And those acceptance criteria are pulled from the competitor device search. So there's a lot of work that goes into the state-of-the-art section. So Sarah was right to call it out as something early in your planning.
All right, let's go ahead and get to our next question. And Lori, this is a good one. This question comes from Pradeepa, and she's asking, what are the key points that an RA person looks for in the CER during the review process?
Sarah will have some opinions on this as well. So this now we're talking about review, the final review. In our experience and how we usually engage with our clients, there are two rounds of review. First round of an entire CER. So this is the first draft, but of an entire CER, not pieces. First thing I would say to this question is, don't review the CER in pieces. That would be like reading one chapter in a book and saying, yeah, the book is great. It doesn't work like that. The reviewers plan your review cycles for when the CER is complete. It's a first draft. Now, it may not have everything in it. There may be some gaps, waiting for some late breaking document. The writer can placehold that. It's like, we're still waiting for this from the design team. So that the reviewers understand that something isn't actually missing, it's just delayed data, for example. But the CER otherwise should be almost completely intact. And then with regards to review, usually the first round of review from our experience, is usually with just one or two people. In other words, whoever's leading that project internally. They've got the folks that we talk to, the person that we talk to every day as the writing team. They're the ones that know the most about the CER. And then that will go through one round of review and we'll do some updates. And then the second round of review goes out to the cross-functional team. And some tips there is to ask everyone to clear their calendar, have some time to do this, because this is at the end of the CER process and you may be jammed with timelines. This has to be done by Thursday and this is Monday. You're not going to have time to do a full review and gather all the cross-functional feedback, make those edits and send them back. So give yourself plenty of time, like plenty of time. And prep your cross-functional team in advance to, sounds a little rude, but for everyone to stay in their lane. If you're asking the R&D folks, have them look, they should read the entire CER or whatever they choose to do, but their input is critical with regards to design and technical. RA's review is critical when it comes to issues with regards to regulatory submission and alignment with regulatory expectations. Obviously, the clinical team is going to be looking at, so everyone's eyes should be focused primarily on what they are the experts at, is the best way that I can give you advice. Sarah, do you have anything to add to that?
So I think mostly from my perspective, it's those cross-functional reviews that can really take the longest, and making sure that you've looped in the correct people early in the process will help with that. There's nothing worse than finding out late in the review process that an indication has been dropped or added, even worse. That can require some last minute revisions, and sometimes those cross-functional teams are really the only people with those pieces of information. So I would say definitely having that on their calendar and having their perspective prior to seeing the final copy would definitely be helpful.
Great.
All right. Moving on to our next question. And Tracy is asking, for small biotech, how do you balance on having in-house RA support versus outsourcing RA to consultants who have specific expertise?
I can start there with that. So we get this question. First of all, a caveat and a disclaimer. Our regulatory writers with Criterion Edge are not regulatory affairs specialists. They're not members of RAPS. Usually they don't have an RAC certification. They're scientists, and they have lots of opinions about regulatory requirements within the CER or PER. They know the documents, they're subject matter experts on these documents. So the first thing is identify when you need RA support and expertise that you might need to get from outside, and you do have an RA person inside and you need to bolster that bandwidth with somebody else. I would say that in that scenario, pick a leader and make sure that everyone knows what their scope of responsibility is. If you have multiple, like a consultant coming in to help, are they assigned to only XYZ project, for example? And that they should consult with your in-house person when they have questions, or how they interact and interface with your in-house person. If you do not have an in-house team of regulatory affairs professionals at all, then you definitely need to outsource. You need that expertise in-house. And we are often, as a team, we're often brought in with clients that we work long-term with, and we almost become an embedded member of their own team. And I would say that it's the same in this case. If you outsource a regulatory affairs professional, they should be embedded especially because they have eyes on so many things. They should be embedded with your team. And with regards to specific expertise, well, sure. Then if you're hiring a consultant for a 6-month or 1-year period of time for some sort of very specific project, you get to choose what that person's specific expertise is about and match their expertise to the needs of your project. That seems to make a lot of sense. So Sarah, anything you have further to add?
I think it comes down to that bandwidth. It's, you know more than anybody how much time you have available to you to make these key decisions and the importance of staying on top of these timelines. So really it's balancing the risk of having a delay in the overall process and what that could mean from your company's perspective.
Yeah, great question.
Okay, moving right along. Our next question comes from Michelle. Can you elaborate a little bit on the state of the art? And Sarah, this question is probably for you.
So the state of the art section, its role in whether it's the CER or the PER, its role is really to lay the groundwork, to sort of set the stage for your particular device. So you want to explain when it would be used, under what circumstances. So you'll go into some information about the medical condition. You'll describe any relevant clinical practice guidelines. You want to describe any alternatives for either treating something. So how are the different other options? How do they compare? Like, what are the pros and cons of the different alternatives? And then you really want to go into explanation of the entire landscape. So what is the competitive landscape? Who are your most closely, who are the tests or the devices that you consider to be your closest competitors, and provide a justification of that. So there are kind of two parts really within the state of the art section. You want to explain and justify the medical indications, all of your PICO terms, those population indications, comparators and outcomes. But then you also want to present data that helps you establish your acceptance criteria.
All right, great answer. Thanks, Sarah. Here's our next question. Broya is asking, for first-time CE Mark participants, when do you suggest that we have all our PEP portions completed by?
Well, one thing I would, these are plans, SVP, APP, CPP, completed by. I will admit to not being aware that there are sub portions of the plans. I know that there's a scientific validity report, analytical performance report, and clinical performance report. I am not aware under IVDR that there are sub plans. I'm only aware that there's only one PEP, performance evaluation plan, that would encompass all of those aspects, the scientific validity, the analytical performance, and the clinical performance. Sarah, do you have thoughts on that?
Yes, that was my understanding as well, that the PEP will certainly refer to those different reports, the plan for collecting and continuing to collect all of those data pieces. So I would say, for many of the clients that we're helping, they begin the process of preparing their plan fairly early, as early as possible. But knowing that once you actually start to develop and write one of these reports, you may start, especially that scientific validity report, you may notice that there have been changes or gaps in the approach that you're taking. So that could and will directly inform your planning purposes. So it is an iterative process. You provide your plan as to how you're going to collect this data. When you start to identify identify new pieces of data or changes that are occurring within the field, your plan may need to change before you have that final copy. So we always suggest giving yourself enough time to be able to make those tweaks by doing some of that SVR legwork very early in the process.
One of the things that we do when we're engaged with our clients is our team will assign one particular person on our team if we've been asked to update or write the CEP and the CER. That is very common. One portion of our team or one person on our team will be in charge of the CEP and writing it almost simultaneously with the work of the CER, because there's so much work that goes into a CER. And the CEPs, because they don't contain data, they're plans. They're more straightforward document to write, and they're written almost simultaneously. And it's common that if it takes us, say, 4 months, for example, from start to finish to write a CER, which is common and almost minimal. If we start at the CEP at the same time, the CEP tends to get finished about a month before the CER. You don't want to rush the CEP. Again, as Sarah just said, there may be changes or updates that you need to make in your planning as you are moving through the clinical evaluation process and writing that report. So you keep your CEP fresh, make it complete, and save it to make last minute tweaks if you need to, just as Sarah suggested.
All right, thanks, Lori. And here's sort of another follow-up question. For the standalone reports, SVR, CPR, APR, should they be read on their own, or is it okay to refer directly to other documents?
So for each of these reports, think of them as kind of like if you're writing a thesis, you're going to be publishing documents, you're going to publish literature prior to graduating, but you wouldn't just staple those 3 reports together and call that your thesis. So the standalone reports should serve as an independent document. But as you're going to prepare the PER, you need to be ready to make that connection for the notified body. Don't assume that they're going to extrapolate and make those connections themselves. Or lay out each of these different reports, what information is contained within, and then present that argument as to how they are relevant compared to one another. So like, for instance, the SVR is going to be where you're going to present that state of the art and the competitive landscape. You're going to justify your choice of analyte. So your clinical performance report will present the data on your device, while all of the landscape analysis will be presented within the SVR. Those 2 reports will certainly refer to, the CPR will certainly refer to the SVR, but the SVR should serve as that sort of objective. This is the information regarding the state of the art. It's not going to contain your own device's data, because that would mean that you're using your own device to compare your device to later. So you want to make sure that it serves as an independent, very objective, very well organized report. But the CPR and the APR will definitely need to refer to the data contained and the justification contained within the SVR. They're just looking at it from 2 different perspectives. They're looking at the in-house data for your particular test. The APR is basically what happens in your company's labs. Under ideal circumstances, how does the testing perform? And then the clinical performance report is basically the data on your particular test once it leaves your doors and it's being used in real world settings. So that's going to be where you may encounter some of those cross reactivities or interferences or ways in which the test does not necessarily perform as you'd like, but you can justify though that it still may be considered state of the art because it can be used under these circumstances and in these scenarios.
One thing I'd like to say to add to this is that, just to speak directly to the question, Sarah, you gave a great overview, but I want to be sure that should they be read on their own? Yes.
Yes.
Each one of those reports is a standalone document, the notified body will certainly be reading them on their own and give feedback specifically contained to the SVR and the CPR and the APR and ultimately the PER. Each review is an independent review of the document. And then it says, or is it okay to refer directly to other documents? I'm not sure what that means, but if it means that within any of these documents, you say, make statements like, well, we're not going to present that here, refer, like in the PER, for example, you say, oh, all the data, is in the CPR, go look at that. That won't fly in the PER. All these documents have to be standalone and be readable from beginning to end. Yes, they can refer to other documents if further clarification may be needed by the notified body. So your references should be very robust within each of these documents, but the information should be housed within each document. Do you think that's clear, Sarah? The information, yes. Okay. Thank you for the question.
All right. Here's our next question coming from Prashantha, and she would like to be briefed on the application and presentation of ISO standards in the CEP and CER.
Sarah, what do you think? That's fairly straightforward answer.
Yes, generally we present these very early in the reports, in one of the very early sections within the template, usually in a tabular format. You will certainly refer to them throughout the report. So you will have cross-references or potential other sections where you'll cite one of these standards, but we refer to them in that early section within the CER.
So right. So it's up there in the front of the CER or PER with where abbreviations are. And well, actually, it's probably within section 1, the executive summary or something like that, where you're displaying, and here are all the references, regulatory references that this entire document contains in a tabular format, as Sarah said. And then but it's a cite as you write type of thing, a little bit in that if you're writing a paragraph that refers to ISO standard 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you need to cross-reference that and make sure right there on the spot that you're telling the notified body reviewer that this statement that was just made in this paragraph is based upon the requirements of some standard or regulation.
Okay. Our next question comes from Doug, and he's asking what data needs to be collected? Who is responsible for collecting and analyzing the performance data?
So this is a key decision to make very early on, because unfortunately, if no one is assigned this task, it's probably you. And this part, in my experience, takes the longest. Depending on your device, I mean, you could be looking at hundreds of articles potentially. So having a really solid plan for not only who is collecting and analyzing the performance data for your device, but who is collecting the data for the landscape analysis for all of your competitors. Those are two separate sections within the CER. And if you're doing this for a PER, it's even a little bit more complex because you have actually 3 separate data sets. You have the analytical performance, the clinical performance for your device, but then you also have the landscape analysis within the SVR. So we typically facilitate this process by collecting all of the data from the published literature for our clients. So as we're preparing the report, this would fall in our under our area of expertise, but for many clients who are trying to prepare these reports themselves, we may have some clients who decide they're going to tackle the APR on their own, but then they need help with the SVR or something to that effect. But there should be someone who's clearly identified as being responsible for helping to collect and synthesize all of this performance data, as well as someone and probably a team of individuals who are determining which data to collect. That choice for the performance objectives needs to be very strategic to avoid setting yourself up for either collecting not enough data or too much data.
Or the wrong data.
Or the wrong data, even worse. Yes.
This is a great, it seems like a simple question, a couple of questions here on face value, but it strikes to the heart of the whole strategy and the whole process. This is a process, the CER or the PER is the process of collecting, analyzing data at the end of the day, and then making the argument that the device meets the applicable regulatory standards and expectations. So data is always at the heart of this. So who needs to do it? What are the data that need to be collected? How are you going to collect it? And then probably most importantly, how are you going to document all of that? And then finally, how are you going to insert that data and analyze that data within these reports? The data is literally at the heart of this process, all of it. So that's an important question to make. And I would add that whoever is in charge of this needs to fully understand how to collect data and to MDR or IVDR standards.
Okay, thanks, Lori. We have about 5 minutes left, so we'll get to a few more questions here. Our next question is from Roya. For the IVDR compliant PER, one of the new sections is the Scientific Validity Report. Do we include any of the data for our own device clinical performance studies in this portion, or will we keep this all in the APR and the CPR?
Excellent.
Yes. So this is a very common misconception, especially when we're being tasked with writing the scientific validity report for clients. A lot of them will want us to search for their device or ask us, where is the data for our device? And really, it should not be in the landscape analysis. You will explain how your particular technology works. You're going to go into detail about the maturity of this particular technology and how it fits into the entire diagnostic scheme. If you have a test that's a PCR based test, and you can also use an antigen test or an antibody test, or some, that there are multiple ways of making a diagnosis, you want to go into detail about the overarching technology underlying your test. But you're not going to include the data for your test here. Those will appear within the APR and the CPR. The purpose of the scientific validity report and that landscape analysis is to show how well your closest competitors perform. So devices or assays that use very similar technologies, very similar analytes, similar cutoff values, you're going to collect all of that data and perform an analysis to devise your acceptance criteria. And then those acceptance criteria within the scientific validity report will then be used to assess whether or not your device is state of the art by presenting it and comparing it to the data within the CPR and the APR.
Okay, great. Here's our next question. Who should be the principal author of the CER? And what would you say to this question?
Well, I love the question because at its heart, it's asking about who should be the leader. And it also implies that there are multiple authors, which is true. So both of those are true. It takes a village to write a CER, the same for a PER. It definitely does. But somebody needs to be the leader. And there needs to be a consistent voice throughout the CER from beginning to end. And it needs to be clearly understood. So it needs to, the analyses done in the CER are complex. And I say this a lot. I think in some of these sessions, I've said it before. Some of you may have heard me say, we write a lot of different kinds of documents. Our team does. It has for many years. And and I can say with certainty that the CER is the most complex. And I'm talking about complex regulatory submissions. Nothing is more complex from a writing standpoint than the CER or the PER, because the author or the voice in the CER there's so many throughput kind of threads that need to be kept track of from the beginning all the way through the end, that it's easy to lose your way and lose your way in the story. So as long as there are one or two people, excuse me, that are responsible for writing or at least reviewing or guiding the CER, if multiple people are writing it, somebody has to be that final voice and that final eyes. And it can't wait until it gets to the review stage, because you don't want to make wholesale changes once you get to the end of your review at that point, because that's usually towards the end of the project. So it's a great question. Who should be the principal author? Somebody who can write.
Yeah.
Somebody who can write, not just know about the device or know the regulations. The storytelling and the analysis and the presentation and the heavy lifting that you have to do in a complex document with knowing Word very well and knowing how to cross-reference and doing so much heavy lifting. It's right, Sarah? I mean, it's not just, I know the device better than anybody, but can that person write? Can they tell a story? Can they keep track of all of this? And do they know how to manage Word?
Yes, it's that organization. And you certainly need the input of the people who are doing the analytical performance studies or the clinical performance studies. But even within those studies, you can't be an expert on every single aspect, but you have to be able to tell the story based on the information provided by those experts.
So it's a tough call. And this is not a plug for Criterion Edge, but if you don't have a person like that on your team who can literally devote full time to writing this for probably 2 months, and you can't spare that person, I would say that's another thing to consideration. It takes an enormous amount of time to write a CER, enormous amount of hours. And we're a team of writers, and we sometimes assign 2 or 3 people doing different functions on a CER to get it done in 3 months or 4 months. So one person slogging through this, that's a 6-month-long process at least. And they're not really doing much of anything else within your organization. So if you're going to spend your outsourcing dollars wisely, I would say choose a good writing partner for the CER if no one on your team has ever done it before. Folks like, other companies like ourselves, we've done this a lot. We have pressure tested templates. By pressure tested, I mean they've gone in front of the notified body. So we know how to construct the story. So it's not a small undertaking and not a small decision about the writing of it. This is a very heavy writing project.
Okay, I think that's a good place to end on. That brings us to the end of our time here today. I hope that Sarah and Lori were able to answer most of your questions, but if they weren't, we'll get to follow up with you by email later on. And if you'd like to discuss your question or project needs further, we invite you to book a free consult with us. You can send us an email to consult@criterionedge.com. Spots are limited, so be sure to book yours soon. Thank you again, Lori and Sarah and everyone for joining us today and for all your really great questions. Take care, and I hope to see you at our next webinar. Have a great day.